That doesn't belong here. Brett Calhoun said it the way a man says something he's said 1,000 times before, low and certain, the words dropping from his mouth like change from a pocket he didn't bother to check. He was standing at the bar window with a bottle of Heineken pressed against the glass, watching the black Mercedes roll up the cobblestone drive below, and neither Pryor nor Gaines, the two younger officers sitting behind him on the mahogany stools, said a word back. They didn't have to. They'd both heard that particular tone before, and they both knew what it meant. And what it meant was that someone was about to have a very different afternoon than they'd planned. Outside, Raymond Holloway stepped out of his car into the kind of Saturday afternoon that made you forget briefly that the world was anything other than warm light and green grass and the distant sound of a PA system being tested over by the first tee. He was 58 years old, built lean and straight, the way some men get when they've spent their whole lives refusing to bend, wearing a navy polo pressed to a crease sharp enough to cut paper and khakis that fit exactly the way tailored clothes were supposed to fit. He moved without hurry, the measured pace of a man who understood that his presence in any room was already a statement before he opened his mouth, and that rushing it would only make things worse. Darius was already jogging across the lot before Raymond had fully straightened up a 20-year-old with a quick smile and the kind of energy that made you think he'd probably run everywhere until the day he didn't have to anymore. He was studying business at State and had worked the valet stand at Fairlawn 3 summers running, and Raymond had known him long enough to ask about his mother by name and mean it. Mr. Holloway. Darius reached for the door, then caught himself and grinned. "Let me get the trunk." Raymond handed over his keys and moved around to the rear of the car, and when the trunk opened, he reached in and lifted out the golf bag, the way you lift something you've been carrying your whole life. Not careful exactly, but aware. The bag was vintage brown leather gone soft at the edges, brass hardware that had been polished so many times it had lost the hard shine and taken on something warmer, and it was the kind of bag that made people who knew things about golf stop and look. Darius had stopped and looked the first time he'd seen it 2 summers ago, and hadn't entirely stopped looking since. Raymond stood with the bag in hand and did what he always did before walking into Fairlawn Country Club. He reached up to his left lapel and adjusted the small platinum pin that lived there, the one engraved with his name, and the year 1996, in letters small enough that you had to be standing close to read them. It was a reflex, like checking a seatbelt. He didn't think about it. His hand knew where to go. Ahead of him, a long white banner stretched across the front of the Georgian clubhouse between 2 magnolia trees, the kind of banner that took a facilities crew most of a morning to hang right. It read in clean red letters on white 14th Annual Children's Hospital Charity Classic, co-hosted by Raymond Holloway and Mayor Diana Okafor. Raymond glanced up at it the way you glance at your own name in a program long enough to confirm it's there, not long enough to do anything about how you feel about it, and then he kept walking. You talked to Professor Whitfield, yet he asked Darius, who had fallen into step beside him. About the spring internship, called him Thursday. He said he'd put in a word. Good. If he doesn't follow through by next week, call me and I'll call him myself. You don't have to do that, Mr. Holloway. I know I don't have to. They walked another few steps in comfortable silence, and Raymond let himself feel for just a moment the particular satisfaction of a day that was supposed to be exactly what it was. Straightforward, meaningful, the kind of afternoon that reminded you why you'd built everything you'd built. 47 teams were registered. The goal was $520,000 for the Children's Hospital. He had been co-hosting this tournament for 14 years, and every year the number went up, and every year the waiting room on the 3rd floor of the hospital had a few more things in it that hadn't been there before because of this afternoon, because of these people, because of the simple, reliable fact that if you asked enough of them to show up and do something, good enough of them would. He had helped found this tournament in 2010. Vivian had sat across from him at the kitchen table with a legal pad listing every board member they knew well enough to call every sponsor they could approach every reason someone might say no and what they'd say back. She had been methodical about generosity, the way she was methodical about everything, which was to say completely without reservation until the thing was done. He reached his right hand down to the brass clasp on the golf bag, touched it for a second with his thumb, and then let go. 2 years since Vivian. This was the first time he'd co-hosted without her standing at the registration table, smiling at everyone who walked in like they were personally her guest. He'd thought about that this morning when he loaded the bag into the car, the same bag she'd given him on their 25th anniversary, having spent 4 months tracking down every club in the vintage 1982 set he'd mentioned exactly once in 1999 in a conversation he hadn't even remembered having. She remembered everything. The 4-iron had been her favorite. She'd used it to take him apart on the back nine at Hilton Head the summer before they got the news about the cancer, and she'd been insufferably pleased about it for the rest of the trip, and he had loved her for it with the full weight of everything he had. The bronze plaque on the wall near the junior training entrance read, Raymond J. Holloway Training Center in letters that caught the light. He walked past it without slowing down. He had been a member of Fairlawn Country Club since 1996. He had been the second black member in the club's 60-year history, a fact that the membership committee had not mentioned during his induction, and that Raymond had not mentioned either, because naming it out loud would have made certain people uncomfortable in a way that would have cost him something, and he had learned early and thoroughly that some prices were not worth paying when the same result could be achieved differently. He kept his membership card in his breast pocket, not his back pocket. He had always kept it there. His hand knew where to go. He noticed the 3 men near the clubhouse bar entrance approximately 8 seconds after stepping out of the car, because Raymond Holloway had not survived 58 years as a black man in spaces that were not designed for him by being slow to notice things. There was a particular quality to the attention, not curious, not welcoming, but assessing the way you assess something you think might be a problem, and one of them wore a police union cap and was holding a bottle of beer at 11:30 in the morning and watching Raymond's car with the expression of a man doing arithmetic in his head. Raymond's shoulders did not change. His pace did not change. His voice, still talking to Darius about Professor Whitfield, did not change. But his right hand moved down to the brass clasp of the golf bag one more time and rested there, and this time he didn't let go right away. Darius felt it before he saw it, that shift in the air, the way certain afternoons turn on a hinge, and he stopped walking when Raymond stopped turning to see what Raymond was already seeing. The man from the bar entrance was crossing the parking lot toward them. Tok Vang Nyat Mat Da Buk Chun Rung. Tactical shoes on a Saturday. The police union cap sat low enough to shadow his eyes. He was holding the beer bottle at his side, not drinking from it, just holding it the way some men hold things to have something in their hands that they could set down hard if they needed to. Darius took a half-step back, then stopped himself. He reached into his apron pocket and found his phone. He kept it there, fingers resting on it. The man crossed the last 30 feet of parking lot without changing speed or expression, and when he was close enough that Raymond could see the color of his eyes, he stopped and said, "You got some kind of business being here." Raymond looked at him for a full second before answering. Not a long second, not dramatic, not defiant, just the second a man needs to make sure he's understood what he's dealing with before he responds to it. "I'm a member," Raymond said. His voice was level and polite in the way that a very tall building is level through engineering, through intention, through the application of significant force to achieve apparent effortlessness. "And I'm co-hosting today's tournament. Is there something I can help you with?" The man said nothing for a moment. He looked at the Mercedes. He looked at the golf bag. He looked at Raymond's face. "We'll see about that," he said. Darius's thumb unlocked his phone screen and he angled it slightly downward, and he didn't move from where he was standing. His name, as Raymond would learn it later from the incident report, was Brett Calhoun. Officer Brett Calhoun, though he was not on duty that afternoon, and had not been on duty since Thursday morning. He was 43 years old, 16 years on the force, and he carried himself with the particular authority of a man who had never once in 16 years been made to fully answer for himself. His hair was the color of dried straw cut short enough that it barely moved in the afternoon breeze, and his face was the kind of face that had been red for so long it had stopped being a condition and become a feature. He walked around Raymond slowly, not menacingly. He was too practiced for menacing, but with the deliberate, unhurried quality of someone who had learned that the performance of authority was often more effective than authority itself. He looked at the Mercedes. He looked at the golf bag again, longer this time, the way someone looks at something they've already decided they don't believe in. He came back around to Raymond's face. "Private club," Calhoun said. "Members only. You got documentation?" "Of course." Raymond set the golf bag down and reached for his wallet in one smooth motion, slow and deliberate. Both hands in clear sight, the way he had been reaching for his wallet since he was 19 years old, and his father had sat him down and explained with the patient precision of a man who loved his son and understood the world exactly how to survive certain kinds of encounters. "I have my membership card and my ID." He produced both. The membership card was platinum-colored, the kind of card that cost a great deal of money and was designed to communicate that it cost a great deal of money with his name engraved across it in clean letters. Raymond J. Holloway, member, since 1996. He handed both cards to Calhoun. Calhoun took them. He held the membership card up to the sunlight, squinting at it like a man deciphering a foreign language. He ran his thumb across the embossed surface. He turned it over. He did all of this at a pace that was too slow to be about actually examining the card and too deliberate to be accidental, and by the time he had been holding the cards for 45 seconds, the couple standing near the terrace steps had stopped talking, and the woman in the green sundress near the practice putting green had turned to watch, and Darius was no longer pretending to be looking somewhere else. "These look off to me," Calhoun said. His voice was loud enough to carry. Not shouting, just pitched to reach. Raymond kept his expression neutral with the ease of long practice. "They're not off. I've been a member here for 28 years. If you want to verify Jennifer Holt is the club manager, she can confirm everything. I'll do my own confirming." Calhoun didn't lower the card. "Who are you here to see, my co-host?" "Mayor Okafor. She's running a few minutes behind." Something moved across Calhoun's face, fast suppressed, but there. He looked at Raymond. He looked at the banner on the clubhouse. The banner was large enough to read from the parking lot. His jaw moved slightly, but whatever the calculation was, it didn't change what he did next. "The mayor." His laugh came out flat. "Sure. And I suppose that's her car too." "It's mine," Raymond said. "Uh-huh." Calhoun handed the cards back without looking at Raymond, holding them out to the side like something he'd found on the ground. "Empty your pockets. All of them." The words landed in the air between them and just hung there for a moment. Around the perimeter of the parking lot, at least 20 people had stopped doing whatever they'd been doing. A woman on the terrace put her hand over her mouth. 2 men in golf shirts looked at each other and then looked at their feet. Raymond understood in the space of a single breath exactly what was happening and exactly where it was going. And he made the calculation the same way he had made it before at 22 and 31 and 45. The grinding necessary math of deciding what a moment was worth $520,000 for sick children sat on one side of the scale, and on the other side sat the image of himself in handcuffs in front of 47 teams who had shown up today to do something good. He had not come this far by being reckless with other people's needs. He emptied his pockets. He placed each item on the hood of the Mercedes one at a time. His wallet, his keys, his phone, a money clip with 4 folded bills, a single golf tee that had been in his pocket since last week without him noticing. Calhoun picked up the Rolex. He turned it over in his hands, and his expression said what his mouth hadn't gotten to yet. Where'd this come from? Raymond looked at the watch. It was old, older than a lot of the people on the terrace watching right now, with a face the color of champagne and a scratched crystal that he had never replaced, because the scratches were part of it, because his father's hands had made them, and his father's wrist had worn it for 30 years before Raymond's birthday when the old man pressed it into his palm and said, "You've earned something that lasts." 3 months later, he was gone, my father Raymond said. 2 words, no elaboration. Sure. Calhoun set it down on the hood with a click that was slightly harder than it needed to be. Let's see what else you've got. He moved around to the trunk without asking. Raymond hadn't offered. The trunk was already open from when he'd pulled the bag out, and Calhoun leaned in and looked around for a moment, cataloging, touching things lightly with his fingertips, the way a man touches things when he wants to own them with his hands without technically taking them. Then he straightened up and reached for the golf bag. Raymond had set it down near the rear bumper when he reached for his wallet, and it sat there on the cobblestone in a strip of afternoon sun, the leather warm and golden-looking, the brass hardware catching light. Calhoun picked it up by the bottom strap and hefted it, feeling the weight. Darius had gone very still. By this point, the crowd on the terrace had grown to somewhere between 25 and 30 people, and none of them were talking anymore. They had the look of people who knew that something was wrong and were trying to decide whether knowing it was enough. A man in a linen blazer had his hand on his wife's arm. A woman in her 60s, who Darius recognized as Mrs. Elise Whitmore, she'd been coming to this club since before Darius was born, stood at the top of the terrace steps with a glass of iced tea, and her mouth pressed into a thin line, watching the golf bag in Calhoun's hands with eyes that had some specific knowledge behind them that most of the other watchers didn't have. Jennifer Holt, the club manager, appeared at the main entrance with her hands twisted together in front of her face the color of copy paper. She looked at the scene, she looked at Calhoun, she looked at Raymond. She did not walk out. Pryor and Gaines had followed Calhoun out of the bar and were standing 15 feet back, far enough to be not involved, close enough to be watching. Gaines had looked at the tournament banner. Gaines had read the names on it. Gaines was doing the same arithmetic everyone with common sense was doing, and the number it was coming out to was not one that made him feel comfortable. "You got a lot of hardware for someone who just dropped in?" Calhoun said, still holding the bag. He was talking about the clubs inside. He hadn't looked in the bag. He was just holding it, feeling the weight of something expensive that he didn't have. "Those are my golf clubs," Raymond said. "For the golf tournament I'm co-hosting." Calhoun looked at him. He set the bag down on the cobblestone and nudged it with his foot. Then he picked it up again by the bottom strap, and something in the way he shifted his weight told Darius what was about to happen before it happened, and Darius raised his phone without deciding to. Calhoun flipped the bag upside down. 12 clubs hit the cobblestone in a rush of metal on stone, the sound ringing out across the parking lot like something breaking that wasn't supposed to break. And then under the general clatter came one specific sound. A sharp, dense crack of dense wood meeting dense stone at the wrong angle, and then silence. Raymond didn't move. His hands were at his sides. His jaw was set so hard you could see the muscle working in his cheek. The 4-iron lay at an angle on the cobblestone, and the wood of the head had split along the grain, a clean fracture that ran from the crown down through the face, and the afternoon sun hit the pale interior wood of the break and made it look like something that had been alive and wasn't anymore. Calhoun looked at the clubs scattered on the ground and ground the heel of his shoe into the leather of the bag, leaving a full print across the embossed surface. He did it without looking down the way you do something you want to do but don't want to be seen doing. Raymond stared at the broken club for 3 seconds. The crack in the wood. The pale grain inside the break. The small brass cap at the end of the handle that Vivian had replaced because the original had worn down and she'd wanted it to be perfect when she gave it to him. Then he looked up at Calhoun, and his voice when it came was quieter than anything he'd said all afternoon. "Pick them up." Calhoun actually laughed. Short, clean. The laugh of a man who'd been doing this for 16 years and had never once been made to answer for it. Or what? Raymond didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would matter to Brett Calhoun right now, and Raymond understood that with complete clarity. The way you understand something you've had to understand over and over until understanding it doesn't hurt less but hurts differently. He stood there with his hands at his sides and his face still, and he waited, because sometimes the only thing left to do is be exactly who you are until the world catches up. In the distance behind the clubhouse, the PA system crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning shortly. Please make your way toward the registration tent." Calhoun pulled out his phone. Not his radio, his personal phone, and he started to dial. "Dispatch. This is Officer Calhoun Badge 4471. He said it loud and easy, the voice of a man who had made this kind of call before and found the making of it satisfying in a particular way. "I'm at Fairlawn Country Club, 1200 Club Drive. I've got a suspicious individual, black male, mid-50s, claiming membership identification appears questionable. Subject is being uncooperative, and I'm concerned about escalation. Requesting backup for officer safety." Raymond listened to every word with his face still and his hands relaxed at his sides, because he had learned 20 years ago that the expression on his face during these moments would be used as evidence of something, and he was not going to give anyone anything they could use. But he heard it all. Suspicious individual. Identification appears questionable. Uncooperative. Concerned about escalation. He heard the narrative being written in real time and understood that by the time backup arrived, the version of events in the official record would already be half constructed, and his version, the true one, would spend the next year fighting to be heard. His phone buzzed against his thigh. Then again. Then again. He looked down and saw through the fabric of his pocket the shape of the phone lit up, and he reached for it instinctively, and Calhoun's hand came down on his wrist. Not hard. Just there. "Don't. I have a right to. You make a call right now. I add obstruction to the list. Phone stays with me." Raymond looked at the hand on his wrist. He looked at Calhoun's face. He stepped back, and Calhoun reached into his pocket and took the phone, and Raymond watched him look at the screen for a single second before declining the call, and what Raymond saw on that screen in that single second was the name Mayor Okafor and the number 5 next to the missed call icon. Calhoun put the phone in his jacket pocket without changing expression. Raymond breathed in through his nose. Held it. Let it out. 30 feet away, Pryor leaned over to Gaines and said something very quiet, and Gaines looked at the banner again, and then Gaines stepped away from Pryor and turned his back to the parking lot and took his personal phone out of his breast pocket and made a call that nobody around him noticed because he was talking quietly and everyone else was watching Raymond. Jennifer Holt finally moved. She walked out of the clubhouse entrance with her hands clasped and her chin set, and she came across the parking lot with the deliberate stride of a woman who had spent 30 seconds convincing herself to do something she should have done immediately. "Officer." Her voice was professionally calm, barely. "I'm Jennifer Holt. I'm the club manager. Mr. Holloway is a member in good standing. He's been a member since 1996. He's on our board of directors. He co-founded this tournament. There's been a serious misunderstanding here." Calhoun turned to her with the measured patience of a man who has found a new avenue for the same performance. "Ma'am, are you interfering with a law enforcement investigation?" Jennifer's breath caught. "No, I'm simply trying to clarify, because interfering with a law enforcement investigation is a chargeable offense. You want to be charged today." She looked at him. She looked at Raymond. Her eyes went to the scattered clubs on the ground, and then to the broken 4-iron, and her face did something complicated. Then she looked at Calhoun again, and whatever she found there made her take one step back, and then another, and then she stopped, and stood there, not leaving, not advancing, occupying the painful middle distance of someone who understands that they've failed but hasn't figured out how to fix it. Raymond watched her stop. He watched her face go still with the particular stillness of a person who has run out of courage for now. He thought, I will remember that she tried. And then he thought, I will also remember that she stopped. The crowd on the terrace had grown to 40 people or more, and the character of it had changed. In the first few minutes, people had watched with the detached curiosity of bystanders. Something interesting was happening. Maybe it would resolve itself. Maybe it would turn out to be a misunderstanding. But the misunderstanding hadn't resolved itself. The golf clubs were on the ground. The 4-iron was broken. The club manager had been turned back. The man in the navy polo was standing with his belongings on the hood of his car, and another man's hand on his confiscated phone, and the situation had taken on a different weight. The weight of something that was no longer merely inconvenient, but was actively, visibly wrong. And the 40 people on the terrace all knew it, and most of them were still watching without moving. Elise Whitmore was not watching without moving. She was 71 years old, and she had been a member of Fairlawn Country Club since 1978. And she had watched the club transform slowly, decade by decade, into something approaching a place where a person like Raymond Holloway could be a member. And she had been at the board meeting where his application came up in 1996, and she had voted yes and then stayed late to make sure the vote held, because she was the kind of woman who understood that things didn't happen by themselves. She had played golf with Vivian Holloway for 6 years every third Wednesday when the weather allowed until Vivian couldn't anymore. She knew what was in that golf bag. She knew what the 4-iron meant. She handed her glass of iced tea to the man standing next to her and walked down the terrace steps. Calhoun was mid-sentence when he stopped and looked at Raymond again with a new edge in his expression. He said slowly and loudly enough for the people nearby to hear, "You want to tell me what guys like you are doing at a club like this? Because, from where I'm standing, everything about this situation looks wrong." The terrace went quiet. Raymond looked at him for a moment that was slightly longer than the previous ones. "Guys like me," Raymond said. His voice was still level, but it carried the way a voice carries when the person speaking it has stopped being careful and started being precise. "What does that mean exactly? My age, my profession, my car, my clothes." He paused. "My skin color. Don't you dare try to make this about race. I'm asking you to clarify your own words. I'm doing my job. I'm protecting this community." From what Raymond asked, and his voice did not rise, not even slightly, which made the question more devastating than if it had. From a member trying to attend a charity golf tournament, from a man who's been coming here for 28 years, or from the uncomfortable fact that successful black people exist and have exactly as much right to be here as you do, nobody on the terrace spoke. Several phones were recording openly. Sandra Osei, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd for the past 10 minutes with no phone out, just watching quietly, opened the notebook she was carrying. Calhoun's face went dark red, the kind of red that signals something has shifted from performance to genuine feeling. The vein at his temple was visible from 15 feet. He stepped closer to Raymond, and his voice dropped to a register that was more dangerous than the loud one, the register of a man who has stopped performing for an audience and started performing for himself. "Let me tell you something about how this works," Calhoun said. "Guys who don't belong somewhere always have an explanation, always have some story. You know what I see? I see someone who showed up in a borrowed car with property. He can't account for getting loud and entitled when somebody asks a reasonable question. That's what I see. That's what I've always seen when somebody like you shows up somewhere they didn't get to on their own." Sandra Osei's pen moved across her notebook without stopping. Darius had not lowered his phone. His hands had not shaken once. In the middle distance, Pryor was watching Calhoun with an expression that had traveled a long way from the comfortable neutrality he'd started the afternoon with. His hand had come up to his face and was resting there with his thumb under his jaw, and he looked like a man who was doing arithmetic that kept coming out the same wrong number. Calhoun pulled out his personal phone again and dialed, and this time when the call connected, he turned his back to Raymond, which meant he was facing the 40 people on the terrace, which meant every word he said was going to carry, and he said, "Yeah. I've got a situation at Fairlawn 1200 Club Drive. Backup should be about 10 minutes out. Tell them when they arrive I've got a black male subject who has been argumentative and threatening possible stolen property, and I'm going to need help processing a potential arrest." The word arrest hit the crowd the way a dropped glass hits a marble floor. Raymond stood with his hands at his sides, and the knowledge that he was about to be arrested settling over him with the cold weight of something that had always been possible and had now become actual. He thought about the children's hospital. He thought about the photo they'd have of him, whatever photo would attach itself to Arrested at Country Club. He thought about the investors and the city council members and the business partners who had spent 20 years treating him as an equal, and how quickly the story-successful businessman became arrested when a photograph entered the room. He thought about Vivian, who had sat across a kitchen table and planned this tournament into existence, who had driven the 4-iron into the back 9 at Hilton Head and smiled the smile of a woman who knew exactly how good she was. He thought, not this afternoon. And then he heard Gaines, who had come back from wherever he'd gone to make his quiet phone call, say in a low voice to Pryor Chief's coming. Pryor looked at him. You called the chief. Gaines looked at the banner. He looked at Raymond. He looked at the broken 4-iron on the cobblestone and the boot print on the leather of the golf bag. Somebody needed to, he said. The afternoon had acquired a surreal quality that Raymond had felt before in different cities, in different parking lots, and different iterations of the same essential situation. The quality of being inside something that is happening while simultaneously watching it happen. The way certain moments insist on being both lived and witnessed at the same time. The PA system was still testing in the distance. A golf cart was puttering somewhere behind the clubhouse. Birds were conducting their ordinary business in the magnolia trees. The world had not stopped for this. The world almost never stopped for this. He stood with his phone in a stranger's pocket and his clubs on the ground and a boot print on his wife's golf bag, and he breathed slowly and kept his hands still. Calhoun finished his second call and came back around to face him with the renewed confidence of a man who has just summoned reinforcement and feels for the moment invincible. He walked over to the scattered clubs and looked at them with his hands on his hips, the posture of a man surveying terrain he owns. This stuff registered anywhere, he said, gesturing at the clubs with his foot. Got receipts? They were a gift, Raymond said. Everything's a gift with you, huh? Calhoun kicked the nearest club with the side of his foot. Not hard enough to move it much, just hard enough to demonstrate that he could. From who? Your father, too. My wife. The word landed differently than Raymond expected it to. Not on Calhoun. Calhoun's expression didn't change, but on the people within earshot. A woman near the terrace steps made a small sound. Elise Whitmore, who had been descending those steps since Calhoun said somebody like you stopped on the second-to-last step. Your wife, Calhoun repeated in the tone of a man who does not believe the thing he is repeating. She around. She can verify the purchase. Raymond looked at the broken 4-iron on the ground. He looked at the pale wood of the fracture in the afternoon sun. He looked for a long time without speaking. And the silence was not the silence of someone who doesn't have an answer, but the silence of someone who has decided that the answer is not for this man at this moment. No, he said finally. She's not around. He did not explain. He did not owe Brett Calhoun his grief. Calhoun crouched down over the scattered clubs, picking through them with the unhurried energy of someone who has decided this is his afternoon, and he reached for the 4-iron and picked it up, turning it in his hands, looking at the broken head where the wood had split. This one's already busted, Calhoun said. You bring it like this. Something behind Raymond's eyes went white and then went very quiet in the way that extremely cold temperatures are sometimes described as burning. No, Raymond said. I didn't. Calhoun set the club down carelessly and it clattered against 2 others. He stood up and dusted his hands on his pants. He picked up the golf bag, the soft brown leather with the worn brass hardware, the bag that had ridden in his trunk for 2 years because he couldn't bring himself to use a different one, and he held it up, turning it, examining the embossed surface and the fraying edge of the bottom seam, and then without looking at Raymond, he dropped it. It hit the cobblestone with a flat, heavy sound, and the brass hardware rang once, and the boot print Calhoun had already left on the side was now joined by a new scuff across the bottom from the impact, and Calhoun stepped over it and walked back toward where Pryor and Gaines were standing. Raymond stood very still. His hands were at his sides. The fingers of his right hand were straight, pressed flat against his thigh, and then they bent slowly and pressed into his palm, and then they straightened again. He did this 3 times. He was not aware of doing it. He was looking at the 4-iron. The crack ran along the grain of the wood from the crown through the face, clean and complete, the way a thing breaks when it has been made well, and then treated as though it has no value. Inside the fracture, the wood was paler than the outside, which had been oiled and darkened over 40 years of use, and the grain showed clearly tight and even. Someone had made this club carefully. Someone had found it at the bottom of a lot of searching in the back of a small shop in Atlanta that specialized in restoring vintage equipment and paid more than anyone would consider reasonable to have it brought back to the condition it was in right now before this afternoon. Vivian had spent 4 months tracking down the complete set. She had mentioned it to exactly no one because she wanted it to be a surprise, and she had the particular genius for secrecy that came from genuinely caring about the feeling of delight more than the credit for producing it. She had presented them at their 25th anniversary dinner at the kitchen table because she knew he would want to be at home when he opened them, not at a restaurant with people watching. She had said, "I found all 12. Don't ask me how." And he had not asked because that was the deal. And he had held the 4-iron and looked at it for a long time while she watched his face. He had not known that night that she had 4 months left before the diagnosis. He looked at the broken club on the cobblestone. He did not say Vivian's name. He did not say anything. He could not have explained in that moment what the sum total of the afternoon felt like against the specific, unbearable particular fact of this one broken club, because the accounting was too complex and the numbers were too old, and some losses stack on top of other losses in ways that aren't fair and don't follow logic and don't care at all about the circumstances that produce them. Elise Whitmore reached the bottom of the terrace steps and crossed the parking lot in her green dress with her elegant heels clicking on the cobblestone, and she moved without hurrying, and she stopped next to Raymond, and without saying a word, she bent down her knees, made a sound of protest that she ignored, and she picked up the broken 4-iron. She held it the way you hold something that matters. Carefully, with both hands. She stood up and looked at Raymond, and her eyes were wet but not spilling, and she said quietly enough that it was for him and not for anyone else. "She would be proud of you for standing here." Raymond's throat tightened to a point. He nodded once because it was all he could manage. Elise Whitmore turned to face Brett Calhoun, who had stopped walking back toward Pryor and Gaines and was now standing still, watching the old woman with the golf club, and her voice changed, not louder exactly, but different in character, carrying the specific authority of someone who has been listened to for 71 years and doesn't intend to stop being listened to now. "Officer," she said, "this club belonged to a woman named Vivian Holloway. She gave it to her husband on their 25th anniversary. She died 2 years ago. What you have done here today is not investigation. It is vandalism and it is cruelty, and I have watched this entire thing from those steps, and I want you to understand that I will not forget a single moment of it." She set the broken club down on the cobblestone with the careful deliberateness of someone placing an exhibit. She put her hand briefly on Raymond's shoulder 1 full second, nothing more, and walked back to the terrace. Nobody on the terrace said a word. Calhoun's jaw worked. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the phones. He looked at Darius, who had not stopped recording, and then he looked away from Darius. Something had shifted in his expression. Not guilt, not regret, but the first dim recognition that the ground under his feet might not be as solid as it had been an hour ago. He covered it quickly. He squared his shoulders. He turned back to Raymond. "We're waiting for backup," he said. "And then we're going to sort this out properly." "All right," Raymond said. His voice was quiet and completely steady, the way the air is sometimes quiet before the temperature changes, and he looked at Brett Calhoun with eyes that held something much more patient and much more dangerous than anger. "We'll sort it out," he said. Darius had been working valet at Fairlawn for 3 summers, and in 3 summers he had learned a great deal about how rich people behaved when they thought nobody important was watching. He had learned that the ones who were the most comfortable tended to be the ones who were comfortable regardless of who was watching, and that the ones who changed behavior based on audience were usually uncomfortable in a way they couldn't quite name. He had learned that some of the nicest people in the building drove the most modest cars, and that some of the people who parked closest to the entrance were the ones you'd least want to sit next to at dinner. He had also learned that when something was wrong, you recorded it because his mother had told him since he was 12 years old, when you see wrong, you bear witness. Otherwise, it's like it never happened. He had been bearing witness for 25 minutes when Calhoun noticed him again. "Hey." Calhoun crossed the distance between them in 8 strides. Put the phone down. Darius looked at him. He was 20 years old, and he was standing on property he was employed by, and he had been thinking very carefully for the past 25 minutes about exactly where he stood legally and spatially and morally, and he had reached conclusions on all 3 counts that he felt steady about. "I'm a club employee," Darius said. His voice came out even, which surprised him slightly. "I'm standing on club property. I haven't interfered with anything. I'm telling you to put the phone down." "With respect," Darius said, and he meant it without any irony in it at all. "You're not on duty, and I haven't done anything wrong." Calhoun stopped. Something moved through his expression, the calculation visible this time of risk versus reward, and then he stepped back and Darius kept the phone where it was. Raymond, from 15 feet away, looked at Darius. The kid met his eyes. Raymond said nothing because there was nothing to say that would add to what had just happened. Sandra Ose closed her notebook and walked forward. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a gray blazer and dark slacks that were not golf clothes because she was not here to play golf, but to attend the charity luncheon afterward as a guest of the Ngozi family. And she had been standing at the edge of the growing crowd for long enough to have filled 6 pages of her notebook with observations that were organized by legal category: unlawful search, confiscation of property, destruction of property, abuse of authority with timestamps and witness counts and specific words she'd heard in quotes attributed to the correct speaker. She stopped in front of Calhoun with the practiced stillness of someone who had spent 20 years in rooms where the wrong move cost people years of their lives. "My name is Sandra Ose," she said. "I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the ACLU. I'm here as a guest, and I've been observing this situation for approximately 25 minutes. I have one question." She paused. "What was the probable cause for searching Mr. Holloway's vehicle?" Calhoun looked at her. Then he looked at her notebook. Then he looked back at her. "I had reasonable suspicion of suspicious activity." What specific activity? His demeanor, his presence in this area, his presence in a club where he is a documented member, his presence in a way that appeared inconsistent with membership, Sandra asked with genuine-sounding interest. Or with something else. Calhoun's mouth closed. Sandra made a note. "And the probable cause for detaining his personal property, specifically his cellular phone. He was reaching for it during an active. He was standing on private property, complying with requests he was not legally required to comply with, and reaching for his own phone." She looked up. "Is there something I've mischaracterized?" Calhoun said nothing. Sandra turned to Raymond and stepped close, dropping her voice to something the phones couldn't pick up. "I've seen 12 complaints filed against this officer in the last 8 years, she said quietly. 9 were dismissed. I've been looking for a case with enough witnesses and enough documentation to change that. If you're willing, I'd like to talk after this is resolved." Raymond looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. 1 word. No elaboration needed." She stepped back. She reopened her notebook. The 2 backup units arrived without sirens, but with lights pulling into the circular drive with practiced efficiency. Officer Martinez, Senior 51, had worked the 4th District for 18 years, stepped out first and assessed the scene in about 4 seconds. Crowd of 50 with phones out. Woman in a blazer writing in a notebook. Golf clubs on the cobblestone. 1 broken boot print on a leather bag. A man in a navy polo, standing very straight with his belongings on the hood of a Mercedes. And Brett Calhoun badge, 4471. who Martinez had dealt with twice in the past 3 years in situations he would have preferred not to have dealt with. Martinez went to Raymond first. "Sir, your name Raymond Holloway. I'm a member here. 28 years. I'm co-hosting today's tournament." Raymond's voice was steady and factual. "I've been detained without cause, my phone has been confiscated, my vehicle was searched without a warrant, and my personal property has been damaged." Martinez looked at the broken 4-iron on the cobblestone. He looked at the banner on the clubhouse. He looked at Calhoun. Then he looked at Gaines, who was standing near the terrace, and something passed between them. A look that carried information that had been communicated by phone approximately 18 minutes ago, when Gaines had turned his back to the crowd and made the call he'd decided to make. Martinez keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I'm at Fairlawn Country Club, 1200 Club Drive. I need Chief Aldridge personal line, not radio. It's a priority situation. Yes. Now." There was a pause. Then a voice on the other end confirmed connection. Martinez listened for 45 seconds, his expression unchanging. Then he said, "Understood. He's on his way." He looked at Raymond. "Chief Aldridge is approximately 15 minutes out. I need everyone to remain exactly where they are." Raymond looked at the sky for a moment, just a moment, and then he looked back at the broken 4-iron on the cobblestone, and then he looked at Darius, who was still recording, who had not moved, whose hands were perfectly steady. Raymond nodded at him. Darius nodded back. Martinez approached Calhoun quietly and said something brief near his ear, and Calhoun's response was a shrug that tried to be casual and achieved something closer to defensive, and Martinez stepped back and said, "Give him his phone back, Brett." Calhoun looked at him. "His phone," Martinez said with the tone of someone who is not asking twice. "Now." Calhoun reached into his jacket pocket and put the phone on the hood of the Mercedes, not handing it to Raymond, just setting it there with a deliberateness that was its own statement. Raymond picked it up. He looked at the screen. Mayor Okafor, 5 missed calls. He wiped the screen once with the cuff of his polo, a small reflexive gesture, and put the phone in his pocket without calling back. He did not call back. He had not called for help, and he was not going to call for help now, because a thing that had happened to him without his summoning it would be addressed without his summoning it. And that was the way it was going to go. The sound of the Cadillac came before the car did the particular rumble of a government-plated Escalade, taking a parking lot curve faster than the speed limit, the way a driver goes when they are done with patience and have somewhere urgent to be. The car came around the side of the clubhouse and into the main lot, and it stopped and the doors opened. 2 members of the security detail stepped out first and positioned themselves with the practiced quiet efficiency of people who don't need to announce what they're doing. And then Mayor Diana Okafor stepped out. She was 50 years old in a gray blazer over dark pants, and she had been in the middle of a budget meeting when Darius called her. Darius had the number from last year's tournament, when she'd asked him personally to arrange a car for one of the visiting donors, and he'd done it without making a thing of it, and she'd given him her direct number in case anything else came up. She had listened to him for 45 seconds on the phone, and then she had told her chief of staff she was leaving and picked up her jacket. Nobody had called her on Raymond's behalf. Nobody had sent for her. She was here because Darius had watched a man being treated as though his membership in a place he had belonged to for 28 years was a forgery, and had picked up a phone and called the one number he thought might matter. She crossed the parking lot with long strides, and the crowd parted without any production about it, and she went straight to Raymond, and the first thing she said was, "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. It was not entirely true, and they both understood that, but he meant it physically, and she accepted it. She looked at the clubs on the cobblestone. She looked at the boot print on the leather bag. She looked at the broken 4-iron, and her expression made a specific movement when she saw it, a small tightening around the eyes that meant she understood exactly what that club was, because she had been at the anniversary dinner, because she had watched Vivian's face when Raymond opened the bag, because some things you don't forget. She turned to Calhoun. She did not ask his name. She looked at his badge number. "Tell me," she said, "what specifically you observed that led you to detain this man." Calhoun had been building his narrative for 25 minutes, and he began to deliver its suspicious presence, questionable documentation, uncooperative behavior, concern for club security, and Mayor Okafor listened to every word without interrupting, without changing expression, without blinking more than was anatomically necessary. When he finished, she waited a beat. Then she said, "What made the membership card look questionable?" "It just," Calhoun started. "Based on my experience, it appeared." "Appeared how?" "The situation appeared inconsistent with, 'I'm asking about the card.'" Calhoun was quiet. "The card," she said again patiently. "What specifically about the card appeared questionable to you?" He had no answer. There was no answer. The card had appeared questionable because the man holding it appeared questionable to Brett Calhoun. And the only thing questionable about the man was the same thing that had been questionable about him since he pulled up the cobblestone drive in a black Mercedes 25 years ago. And Calhoun could not say that out loud in front of 50 witnesses and a mayor. And so he said nothing. And his silence was the most thorough answer he had given all afternoon. Mayor Okafor bent down and picked up the broken 4-iron from the cobblestone. She held it carefully, turning it over in her hands, looking at the fracture in the wood. Then she looked up at Calhoun. "You know what I've learned about power," she said, her voice still even. "The people who are most certain they have it are usually the people who are least accountable for how they use it." She set the club down. "And the people who use it against someone like Raymond Holloway in a place like this on an afternoon like this, they're banking on the assumption that nobody who matters will be watching." She gestured at the phones, at Sandra Osei's notebook, at Darius. "Everybody was watching," she said. She turned to Martinez. "Get Chief Aldridge on the radio. I want him here." "He's already en route," Mayor Martinez said. "About 8 minutes." "Good." She looked at Calhoun one more time, and whatever she intended to communicate, she communicated it without additional words, and then she stepped away from him and stood next to Raymond, not touching him. Just present the way you stand next to someone when you want them to know they are not standing alone. "I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner," she said quietly. "You didn't have to come at all," Raymond said. "Yes, I did," she said. "That's not how this works." Chief Warren Aldridge was 60 years old, and built like a man who had spent his life indoors solving problems that other people created outdoors, which was in fact how he had spent his life. He arrived in a personal vehicle, a 4-door sedan unmarked wearing pressed khakis and a navy polo that was almost exactly the same shade as Raymond's, which nobody commented on but several people noticed. He had gotten the call from Gaines 40 minutes ago and had driven the 23 minutes from his house in 18, because Gaines had told him enough in the first 30 seconds that he understood what kind of situation he was driving toward. He assessed the scene the way experienced people assess things quietly, completely without telegraphing the assessment. He saw the clubs on the cobblestone. He saw the broken 4-iron. He saw the boot print on the bag. He saw the 50-plus people with phones, the notebook in Sandra Osei's hand, the banner on the clubhouse, the mayor standing next to Raymond Holloway. He walked to Raymond first. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Chief Aldridge. I apologize for what you've experienced here this afternoon." Raymond looked at him. "Thank you, Chief." Aldridge turned to Calhoun. He did not speak immediately. He stood and looked at Calhoun for a full 5 seconds, and Calhoun, who had been radiating defensive energy for the past half hour, went quiet under that look in the way that things go quiet when the temperature drops. Badge Aldridge said, "Chief, I'd like to explain the circumstances. I've reviewed the circumstances, Badge." Calhoun looked at Pryor. Pryor was looking at his shoes. Calhoun looked at Gaines. Gaines was looking at the banner. Calhoun unclipped the badge from his belt. He held it for a moment, just a moment, the way a man holds something he knows he is not getting back, turning it slightly so it caught the light, and then he placed it in Aldridge's open hand. The crowd on the terrace did not cheer. It went very still. Aldridge put the badge in his breast pocket. "You'll receive written notice of suspension pending full investigation within 24 hours. Do not contact any witnesses. Do not discuss this case with anyone other than your union representative and your attorney." He paused. "Martinez will escort you out." Martinez stepped forward. Pryor and Gaines stepped back, not dramatically, not conspicuously, but back, creating the small physical distance that said they had made their choice. Calhoun walked to Martinez's vehicle and got in the passenger seat, and nobody said anything while he walked, and the door closed, and the car pulled out of Fairlawn Country Club's cobblestone drive and disappeared around the magnolia trees. Sandra Osei approached Raymond and the mayor with her notebook open. "I have everything," she said simply. "All of it. When you're ready." Raymond looked at Mayor Okafor. She gave him a small nod. "I'm ready," Raymond said. The tournament started 43 minutes late. The announcer apologized over the PA and did not explain why. Most of the 47 teams already knew why, because most of them had been in the building when the thing happened, or had been told by someone who had been, and the story had moved through the clubhouse the way stories move when they are true and immediate and involve something people witness themselves. Raymond walked to the podium in the main hall with 200 people watching, and he set his notes down and did not look at them. "I want to say something before we start," he said. "Today has been complicated. Some of you know why. I'm not going to spend more time on it right now because what matters most this afternoon is not what happened to me. It's what we're here to do." He paused. "I started this tournament with my wife 14 years ago. She kept a running list of the kids at the hospital who received treatment because of what we raised here. She had very small handwriting, and by year 5 the list was 8 pages long. I keep the list." He paused again. "It's not 8 pages anymore." He looked at the crowd. "Let's go raise some money for those kids." The applause was immediate and long and carried the energy of people who needed to do something good after watching something wrong, which is the particular energy of crowds at their most generous. The tournament raised $591,071 more than the previous record, and Raymond accepted every check with the full attention he gave to everything, because the children on that list deserved his full attention, regardless of what else had happened that afternoon. Sandra Osei met with him in a small conference room off the main hall after the closing reception. She placed a folder on the table. 12 complaints, she said. That's what I've documented so far. 9 of them were dismissed at the supervisory level without review. 3 more were settled quietly. The complainants are scattered across 4 zip codes, all of them within Calhoun's patrol zone, all of them women of color, all of them subjected to searches without probable cause. She looked at him steadily. "Your incident has something none of the others had. You had 5 dozen witnesses at minimum 6 hours of video from multiple angles, and 2 senior law enforcement officials who arrived and immediately took action consistent with your account. What are you asking me? I'm asking you to be the named plaintiff in a federal civil rights case. You'd be suing Calhoun personally and the department for enabling the pattern through sustained inaction." She paused. "The case itself will be about all 12 women, but it needs someone with standing to bring it." Raymond looked at this folder. He thought about the 4-iron on the cobblestone in the afternoon light. He thought about 9 complaints that had gone nowhere filed by people who had less standing than he did and every bit as much right to be heard. "Yes," he said. "Whatever you need." What followed happened with the speed that things happen when there is evidence and momentum, and people who have decided to do their jobs. Calhoun was formally terminated 6 weeks after the incident, the police union's objections overridden by a departmental tribunal that reviewed Roberts Darius's video, Sandra's documentation, and the statements of Pryor and Gaines, both of whom cooperated fully and testified to what they had personally observed. The union president, who had supervised the dismissal of 9 complaints, stepped down amid a state review of his handling of misconduct files over a 12-year period. That investigation was ongoing. The civil rights lawsuit filed by Sandra Osei on behalf of Raymond Holloway and 12 additional plaintiffs settled 8 months later. The settlement included $1.8 million in damages, mandatory external oversight of the department's complaint review process, and body cameras for all officers during both on-duty and official off-duty appearances at public venues. The settlement did not include an admission of wrongdoing which Raymond had expected and noted without surprise. Fairlawn Country Club's board of directors met 4 days after the incident, and Raymond presented a list of demands that he described as non-negotiable. A board vote of 5-2 ratified every item anti-discrimination language added to the guest policy, with enforcement mechanisms, a diversity and inclusion committee with genuine authority, a scholarship program for junior golfers funded at $60,000 per year, an annual audit of membership diversity and mandatory bias awareness training for all board members and senior staff. The board member who had sponsored Calhoun's guest membership resigned before the vote. The junior training center that Raymond had funded was renamed, not after Raymond, after Vivian. The Vivian Holloway Junior Training Center opened with a small ceremony 3 months after the incident, and Raymond stood at the ribbon with a pair of scissors and Mayor Okafor beside him. And when they cut it, a girl of about 12 who had been watching from the side of the building burst into applause, first louder than anyone, and everyone turned to look at her, and she was so purely happy about it that several adults started clapping harder because of her. Darius received notification of a full scholarship through Raymond's foundation in a letter that arrived on a Tuesday in November. He read it twice in the parking lot of the campus library, standing next to his bike, and then he sat down on the curb and called his mother. Raymond did not call him to tell him. He never told the people he helped in advance. He found that it was better to let the letter speak and then to be available when they called. Darius called. Raymond picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Holloway," Darius said. His voice was the voice of someone who has just been surprised by something too large to immediately fit into words. This is—" "You kept the camera steady," Raymond said. "The whole time." There was a pause. "My mom says to tell you thank you," Darius said. "You tell her I said she raised you right," Raymond said. "Now go study." The broken 4-iron sits on a shelf in Raymond's study in the same place he put it the evening he brought it home from Fairlawn, with the cracked face turned slightly out so the fracture is visible. He has not repaired it. He has not replaced it. It is exactly as Calhoun left it, which is exactly as Raymond needs it, a record specific and permanent of an afternoon that tried to diminish him and failed. On the practice green of the Vivian Holloway Junior Training Center on a Wednesday morning when the light comes in low and gold across the fairway, a girl of 13 is working on her grip. She adjusts her hands 3 times before she is satisfied, and then she draws back and drives the ball clean and long and straight, and it drops exactly where she was trying to put it, and she watches it land with the expression of someone who has just understood something she will spend the rest of her life refining. The name on the building behind her catches no particular attention from her. She is thinking about the next shot. Raymond drives past the spot on the cobblestone where the clubs fell past it every time he pulls in and every time he pulls out, and he has never stopped. There has never looked down at the stone to see if any mark remains. He knows the answer. Some things leave marks. He drives past, and his right hand lifts from the wheel for just a moment and touches the platinum pin on his lapel, and then his hand comes back down and he drives on into whatever the afternoon requires of him. If today's story stayed with you, if it made you think about the moments you've witnessed and what you chose to do, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this one survive because people decide they matter. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about courage, justice, and the ordinary people who refuse to accept anything less than their full dignity. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is simply refusing to look away.